winner of an election even before INEC makes that announcement, thereby precluding people at the collation center from changing election results that people at the polling unit already know what it is. But you've heard people say, I won at the polling unit based on my agents, but I don't know what the electoral or returning officer did, and I lost. I mean, that used to
Okay,
be
so
the
what you're
usual
saying now,
refrain.
you're already seeing the game changing in 2023.
It
Things are
has
happening
changed.
differently. It has changed already.
It has
But then
changed, yes.
when we go to the polls, some people could say, okay, it's changed now, but when we go to the polls, that's just another hurdle to cross.
Well, when you go to the polls, you are now. I am now certain, based on that Electoral Act 2022, that we are going to have a reasonable, credible, and fair elections. Why? Because we have a history of it. We have an example in Edo State. No one really cried foul there because, I mean, it was obvious. You have Anambra State. Who did cry foul there? Nobody really cried foul. Then you have Ekiti, and then you have Osun State. So these were more or less like preliminaries, primaries, or get said, let's go, now we have the general election coming up. I am hurtened by the fact that INEC has demonstrated a certain degree of fairness in the smaller states before we go to the bigger states. So this has been a transformational electoral act. And to be fair to the administration, this administration, and specifically, he gets the credit, he gets the discredit. President Muhammadu Buhari has been transformational when it comes to moving the electoral act, comes to moving electoral goals, comes to moving democracy a little bit forward. That doesn't mean that he has done well generally, but in this specific issue, he has done well.
Okay, you just mentioned Peter Obi, who's in the race already, and how the movement is really shaking things. You talk about Obi Dati, and you mentioned how the youths are even more interested in getting their PVCs now. What do you make of his presidential ambition and how far he's going, and the movement, how massive it is?
Well, I think the movement found Peter Obi, not Peter Obi finding the movement. People were tired of recycling the leaders that we do have. But let's keep in mind that Peter Obi is not exactly a new face. He was the vice presidential candidate for Atiku in 2019. He was also a former governor of Anambra State. He's been there in government. That also lends credit to his ability to understand some of the issues that will face government if he gets into power. Peter Obi has emerged. His emergence has changed the conversation. We no longer have, and I'll say it, we no longer have PDP power, APC change, or whatever it is acronym you want to shout out there with a simplistic response that shows that you are on the ground and you have structure. We now have people debating issues. We now have people not just talking about issues, but debating issues. We now have a presidential candidate who is willing to be interrogated, who is willing to be investigated, who is willing to be defined, whether you define him as a good person, as a bad person, but now we define him as a presidential candidate outside of the two major political parties. For the first time, we now have a presidential candidate that people generally know across the Federation of Nigeria and internationally, that is not from APC and is not from PDP. We now have a presidential candidate who says, I will engage in the presidential debate because that is the pathway that people actually get to become the president. So we now have a presidential candidate that challenges all the other candidates to elevate their conversation and no more tit for tat or brick for bricks amongst the presidential candidates and spokesperson. I would say this. Most people would not know the spokesperson for Peter Obi or the spokesperson for Labour Party. And there is a reason for that. But most would know the spokesperson for PDP or for APC because...
Well, the spokesperson for Peter Obi has been out there as well, for the Labour Party. Because when you say most people wouldn't know, because are you saying this particular presidential candidate you're referring to would always want to, speak?
He speaks.
for himself.
He speaks for himself. He speaks for his views. He speaks for what he desires to do. And when I say most people wouldn't know the presidential candidate spokesperson, I'm saying it in the sense that he's not saying the wrong things that make people pause and step back and say, "Come on now, this is inappropriate." All right. But when issues arise, what you actually hear from the presidential candidate himself. That was why there was a challenge when Bola Ahmed Tinubu was kind of shifting off the questions to other people. We have moved away from that. That's why people reacted in such a manner. Not that it was wrong for him to do so, but hey, we've moved away from, please answer this question for me. You answer this question for me.
By proxy thing.
Yes, the appropriate thing now is we want to hear from the candidate that we will be voting for. We don't want to hear from a spokesman who sings. We don't want to hear from a spokesman who dances. We don't want to hear from a spokesman who abuses others. We don't want to hear from a glib spokesperson. We want to hear from the candidate himself. So the emergence of Peter Obi, while I'm not endorsing him, I'm simply saying it has elevated the playground, the playing field, the skills that the candidates bring to bear.
Okay, as you say, while you're not endorsing him, I'm also tempted to ask, is he your candidate?
No, I haven't made up my mind yet because,
Okay.
first of all, I look at this from the angle of if I were the CEO of Nigeria and I want to hire a person into a certain position in the Federation of Nigeria, what would I do? So I bring it down so that people can understand. If I were the CEO of Inspiration FM and I wanted to hire a presenter on air, what would I do? Would I simply hear the person's spokesperson abusing others? No. What I would want is to have an interview. Once I have that interview, it could be one interview or a series of interviews, then among the candidates for the position of a presenter, then I would make an informed choice. Note my word there.